"Mom, now I will take care of your finances." That's what my son Brandon said to me when he showed up at my door with a lawyer, thinking I was too old and confused to manage my own money. I looked at him, at that expensive suit I'd never seen, at the attorney holding papers that would give my son complete control over everything I'd worked 43 years to build. And you know what I did? I smiled. I smiled because Brandon had absolutely no idea what he was about to discover. I'm Nicole Patterson, 74 years old, and I've been living in the same neighborhood in Northeast Portland for 43 years. After my husband Daniel passed away 5 years ago, I thought my relationship with my children would grow stronger, but that morning proved me dead wrong. Brandon stood there in an expensive suit I'd never seen before, holding a briefcase that looked heavier than his conscience. The man next to him introduced himself as Attorney Mitchell Barnes, speaking in that slow, condescending tone people use when they think you're too old to understand basic English. "Mrs. Patterson, your son is concerned about your well-being," he said, eyeing my modest living room like he was already appraising it. I looked at Brandon, searching for the little boy who used to help me fold laundry on Sunday afternoons, but all I saw was a stranger with desperation in his eyes. Brandon paced nervously across my hardwood floors, the same floors Daniel and I installed ourselves back in 1987. "Mom, you're living alone. Anyone could take advantage of you," he said, not even bothering to ask how I was doing. Attorney Barnes opened his briefcase with an exaggerated flourish, pulling out a stack of documents that seemed to materialize out of thin air. "We've prepared a power of attorney for you to sign, Mrs. Patterson. It's a simple document that will allow Brandon to manage your accounts, pay your bills, and handle any financial decisions." Simple, he called it, as if my entire life's work could be condensed into a few signatures on fancy paper. I took the documents from his manicured hands and began reading slowly, deliberately, while Brandon shifted his weight from foot to foot like a child waiting for permission to open birthday presents. "Mom, you don't need to read all that legal jargon," Brandon interrupted, his voice tinged with impatience. "Attorney Barnes has already reviewed everything. This is standard procedure for people your age." People my age, as if turning 74 automatically made me incompetent. I continued reading every single word, every clause, every condition buried in that legal maze. The document granted Brandon complete authority over my bank accounts, my investments, my property, everything I'd spent decades building and protecting. "You seem to be in quite a hurry, Brandon," I said without looking up from the papers. "I have an important meeting this afternoon, Mom, and Attorney Barnes has other clients waiting," he replied, glancing at his expensive watch. The attorney extended a heavy silver pen toward me, the kind that costs more than most people's weekly groceries. "Mrs. Patterson, thousands of seniors sign these documents every day. It's for your own protection," he assured me with a smile that never reached his eyes. But before I signed anything, I looked at both of them and said something they would never forget. "Before I sign anything, gentlemen, there's something you should know," I said, setting the documents down on my coffee table with deliberate care. Brandon stopped pacing immediately, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. Attorney Barnes leaned forward slightly, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine curiosity mixed with concern. "What is it, Mom?" Brandon asked, his voice suddenly cautious, as if he sensed the ground shifting beneath his carefully laid plans. I looked at both of them, these two men who thought they had me figured out, who believed that age had made me vulnerable. "You have absolutely no idea what you're about to discover when you start digging into my finances," I said calmly, then picked up that silver pen and signed my name on every line they'd marked. Brandon's face lit up like Christmas morning, that fake smile spreading across his features as if he'd just won the lottery without buying a ticket. Attorney Barnes quickly gathered the documents, sliding them back into his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd done this dance many times before. "Excellent decision, Mrs. Patterson. You can rest easy now knowing your son will handle everything properly," the attorney said, already moving toward the door. They left so quickly you'd think the house was on fire, Brandon practically skipping to his black Mercedes parked in my driveway. After they left, I stood at my front window watching Brandon's car disappear down Ainsworth Street, the rain-soaked pavement glistening under the afternoon sun. I walked back to my kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down at the table where Daniel and I used to play cards every Friday night. The photo of him on the refrigerator seemed to look at me with knowing eyes, and I could almost hear his voice from beyond. "Nicole, one day you'll have to teach that boy a real lesson about respect," he used to tell me whenever Brandon would cancel our Sunday dinners. That day, I realized, had finally arrived, and the education I was about to provide would be one Brandon would never forget. 3 days passed before I heard from Brandon again. and when he finally called, his voice had that fake cheerfulness that made my skin crawl. "Mom, how are you feeling today? Did you take your medications?" he asked, as if I was some confused old woman who couldn't remember to swallow pills. I only take one blood pressure medication, nothing more. But in Brandon's mind, I must have been some frail, forgetful senior citizen. "I'm fine, Brandon. Why are you calling so early?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Well, Attorney Barnes and I are heading to the bank this morning to organize your accounts. You don't need to come. We'll handle everything for you," he said smoothly. "What time are you going?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. 10 o'clock. The bank manager is already expecting us." "Mom, you're going to feel so relieved once this is all taken care of," he said with that condescending tone. I hung up the phone and looked at the clock on my kitchen wall. The same clock Daniel bought at an estate sale 30 years ago. 10 o'clock at First National Bank, where I'd been a customer since 1979, where everyone from the security guard to the branch manager knew me by name. Brandon had no idea what he was walking into, and that thought brought the first genuine smile to my face in days. I got dressed that morning with particular care, choosing the navy blue dress Daniel always said made me look distinguished, and my pearl earrings from our 30th anniversary. At 9:30, I left my house and walked 3 blocks down to Maria's coffee shop, the little cafe directly across the street from First National Bank. Maria Rodriguez had owned that place for 22 years, and we'd become close friends after her husband passed away around the same time as Daniel. "Nicole, you look different today. Something happening?" Maria asked as she poured me a cup of her special Colombian blend. "Just watching a show, Maria." "Best seat in the house," I replied, settling into the window booth with a perfect view of the bank entrance. At exactly 10 o'clock, I watched Brandon's Mercedes pull into the bank parking lot, and out stepped my son and Attorney Barnes, both dressed in expensive suits. They walked into that bank like they owned the place, Brandon's chest puffed out with confidence, the attorney carrying his fancy briefcase like it contained the secrets to Fort Knox. I sipped my coffee slowly, imagining the conversation happening inside those walls right now. Maria brought me a fresh cinnamon roll, still warm from the oven, and sat down across from me with her own cup of coffee. "You want to tell me what's really going on?" she asked with that knowing look mothers perfect over decades of raising children. I told her everything, from Brandon's surprise visit to the power of attorney, to his assumption that I had maybe $80,000 saved up. Maria's eyes widened with each detail, her hand covering her mouth when I got to the part about the lawyer. "Nicole, your own son? How could he do this to you?" she asked, shaking her head in disbelief. "Greed makes people do terrible things, Maria. Even to their own mothers," I replied, never taking my eyes off that bank entrance. We sat there for over an hour, watching, waiting, and when Brandon and Attorney Barnes finally emerged, the scene was nothing like their confident entrance. Brandon's face was red, his jaw clenched so tight I could see it from across the street, and he was gesturing wildly with his hands. Attorney Barnes walked behind him, practically stumbling to keep up, his briefcase swinging at his side like dead weight. They stopped on the sidewalk right in front of the bank, and I could see them arguing, Brandon pointing back at the building, the attorney shaking his head. "Looks like someone just got a very unpleasant surprise," Maria said with a satisfied smile. I finished my coffee, paid my bill, and walked home the long way, taking my time, enjoying the cool Portland morning air. I'd barely been home 10 minutes when my phone started ringing, the sound cutting through the peaceful silence of my living room. "Mom, we need to talk. Can I come over right now?" Brandon's voice was tight, controlled, like he was trying very hard not to explode. "Of course, son. I'm home," I replied calmly. 20 minutes later, he was at my door, this time alone without his fancy lawyer friend. He walked past me without his usual fake politeness, heading straight for my living room like a man on a mission. "Mom, you didn't tell me the truth about your accounts," he said, not asking but accusing, as if I owed him a detailed financial report. "And what exactly do you want to know, Brandon?" I asked, settling into my favorite armchair, the one Daniel reupholstered himself back in 2003. Brandon remained standing, pacing back and forth across my carpet like a caged animal. "The bank manager said you have multiple accounts, substantial assets, way more than you ever mentioned," he said, his voice rising with each word. I looked at him calmly, noting how his expensive suit was wrinkled now, how sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature in my house. "Did the bank manager tell you exactly how much?" I asked, already knowing the answer would drive him crazy. "No, he wouldn't give specifics, said it was confidential even with the power of attorney until everything is processed properly." Brandon admitted, frustration dripping from every syllable. But he made it clear you're not some struggling widow living on Social Security, Mom. Why did you hide this from me? Hide it. As if my finances were ever his business to begin with. I stood up slowly, walked to my bookshelf and pulled out an old photo album, the kind with the plastic sleeves that yellow with age. Do you remember when you started working at Morrison Construction Company? I asked, opening the album to a specific page. Brandon's face changed, confusion replacing anger as he tried to figure out where I was going with this seemingly random question. Yeah, about 17 years ago. What does that have to do with anything? He replied impatiently. I turned the album toward him, showing a photo of him at 29, standing in front of his first work truck, grinning from ear to ear. Do you remember who lent you $35,000 to buy into that company partnership? I asked quietly. The color drained from Brandon's face as the memory clearly came flooding back. Mom, I paid you back that money, he said defensively. Yes, you did. 3 years later, when the company started making good profits, I acknowledged, closing the album gently. But that's not my point, Brandon, I continued, setting the album back on the shelf. My point is, do you remember what you promised me when I handed you that check? He looked down at his expensive shoes, unable to meet my eyes. I promised I'd never forget what you did for me, he whispered. And yet here you are, not even 5 years after your father died, trying to take control of everything he and I built together, I said, my voice finally showing the hurt I'd been holding back. Brandon opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. And in that silence, I saw the boy I raised fighting with the greedy man he'd become. Mom, it's not like that, Brandon finally managed to say, but his voice lacked conviction, like he didn't even believe his own words anymore. I walked to the window, looking out at Mrs. Chen's garden, where butterflies danced among her roses in the afternoon sunlight. Then tell me, Brandon, why did you come here 3 days after Dad's anniversary with a lawyer I've never met, pressuring me to sign papers? I asked without turning around. The silence behind me was deafening, broken only by the ticking of Daniel's old clock and the distant sound of children playing in the neighborhood park. When I finally turned back, Brandon was sitting on my couch with his head in his hands, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. I'm in trouble, Mom, he admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Finally, the truth was starting to surface like oil on water. What kind of trouble? I asked, sitting down across from him, my maternal instinct fighting with my growing anger. The construction business isn't doing well. We lost 3 major contracts this year, and I made some bad investments trying to make up the difference, he explained, still not looking at me directly. How bad? I pressed, needing to hear the full truth. $240,000 bad, he said, and the number hung in the air between us like a death sentence. There it was. The real reason for his sudden concern about my well-being. The explanation for the expensive lawyer and the rushed paperwork. And you thought you'd just swoop in, take control of your mother's money, and solve your problems? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Brandon looked up then, and I saw tears in his eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were from genuine remorse or just fear of losing his meal ticket. I didn't know what else to do. Sarah doesn't know how bad it is, and if I lose the house, if we have to tell the kids, his voice trailed off pathetically. So your solution was to potentially leave your 74-year-old mother financially vulnerable? I interrupted, standing up abruptly. I wasn't going to steal from you, Mom. I just needed to reorganize some things, maybe borrow against your assets temporarily, Brandon said, and the casual way he said, borrow against your assets, made my blood boil. This wasn't my son talking anymore. This was a desperate man who'd convinced himself that taking advantage of his own mother was somehow acceptable if he dressed it up in nice words. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, please, just listen. He started to stand up. I said, get out of my house, Brandon. Now, I repeated, my voice steel hard in a way he'd rarely heard before. He stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have told him this battle was over. Brandon walked to the door slowly, pausing with his hand on the knob. You're going to regret not helping me, Mom. Family is supposed to stick together, he said, and those words felt like a slap across my face. Family doesn't show up with lawyers and lies, Brandon. Real family asks for help honestly, I replied. He left without another word, and I stood in my living room listening to his Mercedes roar to life and speed away. The house felt emptier than it had in years, even emptier than those first months after Daniel died. I walked to the mantel and picked up our wedding photo, Daniel's young face smiling at me from 49 years ago, and I made a decision right then that would change everything. The next morning, I called my oldest friend, Margaret Sullivan, who'd been practicing law in Portland for 38 years. "Maggie, I need your help," I said when she answered, and just hearing her voice made me feel less alone. "Nicole, honey, what's wrong? You sound upset," she responded immediately. That sixth sense that comes from decades of friendship. I told her everything, from Brandon's visit to his confession about the debt, and with each word I could hear her breathing grow more agitated. "That son of yours needs a serious reality check," Maggie said when I finished. "I'm coming over this afternoon, and we're going to fix this properly." Margaret arrived at 2 o'clock, carrying her worn leather briefcase that had traveled through countless courtrooms, and she hugged me tight before we even said hello. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd signed Brandon's power of attorney just days before, and Maggie spread out documents with the efficiency of a surgeon. "First things first, Nicole. We're revoking that power of attorney immediately," she said, sliding a form across to me. "Can we do that? Won't Brandon fight it?" I asked, worried about making things worse. "He can try, but you're completely competent, and you have every right to revoke it. Plus, I'm going to make sure it's bulletproof," Maggie assured me with that confident smile that had won her dozens of cases. But Maggie didn't stop there. She pulled out more papers, explaining each one with patience and clarity. "We're also going to set up something called a living trust, Nicole. Your assets will be protected and you'll control everything until the day you die," she explained. I listened carefully as she outlined how this would work, how Brandon couldn't touch anything without my explicit written permission, how my granddaughter Emma would be named as successor trustee instead. "Emma? She's only 26, I said, surprised by the suggestion. "Exactly. She's young, honest, and according to what you've told me, she's the only one in your family who visits you without wanting something," Maggie pointed out, and she was absolutely right. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough decision about family and money? What would you do if you were in my shoes right now? Drop a like if you think I'm handling this the right way, because what I'm about to do next is going to shake my entire family to its core. We spent 3 hours at that kitchen table, signing papers, notarizing documents, making phone calls to banks and investment companies. Maggie worked with the precision of someone who genuinely cared about protecting me, not billing hours or earning commissions. "There's one more thing we should do," she said as we finished the last document. "What's that?" I asked, exhausted but feeling more secure than I had in weeks. "We need to document everything Brandon said to you, every lie, every manipulation. If he tries to claim you're incompetent or that I coerced you, we'll have a record," Maggie explained, pulling out a small recording device. For the next hour, I spoke into that recorder, detailing every conversation, every red flag, every moment of betrayal. 3 weeks passed without a word from Brandon, which was unusual even considering our strained relationship. Emma called me every other day, chatting about her work at the nonprofit downtown, asking if I needed anything from the grocery store. "Grandma, Dad seems really stressed lately. Do you know what's going on with him?" she asked during one call, her voice filled with innocent concern. I hadn't told her about the situation yet, wanting to handle it quietly, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "Just business troubles, sweetheart. Nothing for you to worry about," I assured her, hating that I had to be vague with the one family member I trusted completely. Then, on a Thursday morning, I received a certified letter from Barnes & Associates law firm, attorney Mitchell Barnes's official office. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, though I'd been half expecting something like this. Inside was a legal notice stating that Brandon was initiating proceedings to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my own affairs. The words on that page felt like poison, each legal term carefully chosen to paint me as a confused, vulnerable old woman who needed a guardian. "They're actually doing this," I whispered to myself, sitting down heavily in my kitchen chair. I immediately called Margaret, who answered on the first ring as if she'd been waiting for this exact call. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, Maggie said before I even finished explaining. True to her word, she arrived quickly, read through the legal notice with narrowed eyes, and then smiled in a way that reminded me why she'd never lost a family court case in her entire career. "Oh, Brandon really stepped in at this time," she said with satisfaction. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused by her reaction. "He's claiming you're mentally incompetent, but we have medical records, bank statements, and a paper trail showing you've been managing complex financial decisions perfectly well. Plus, his own desperate financial situation gives him clear motive for this action," Maggie explained, already making notes on her legal pad. Over the next few days, Maggie arranged for me to undergo a complete cognitive evaluation with Dr. Patricia Henderson, one of Portland's most respected geriatric specialists. I spent 4 hours in Dr. Henderson's office, answering questions, solving puzzles, recalling details, and discussing my daily routine. Mrs. Patterson, your cognitive function is well above average for your age group, Dr. Henderson told me at the end, signing the evaluation form with a flourish. In fact, you scored higher than many of my 50-year-old patients. Those words felt like ammunition, and I knew we'd need every bullet for the fight ahead. Maggie collected the evaluation, added it to our growing file, and scheduled a court date for 2 weeks later. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in the bed I'd shared with Daniel for 44 years. I kept thinking about Brandon as a little boy, how he used to bring me flowers he'd picked from Mrs. Chen's garden, how he'd cry if I was even slightly upset. Where did that sweet child go? And when did he transform into this stranger willing to humiliate his own mother in court? I got up around 3 a.m, made myself chamomile tea, and sat in the dark kitchen remembering better times. Daniel, I hope I'm doing the right thing, I whispered to his photo on the refrigerator, wishing more than anything that he was here to guide me through this nightmare. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and drizzly, typical Portland weather that matched my mood perfectly. Margaret picked me up at 8 o'clock and we drove to the Multnomah County Courthouse in silence, both of us mentally preparing for battle. Remember, Nicole, stay calm no matter what Brandon or his lawyer says. Don't let them see you rattled, Maggie coached me as we parked. I nodded, smoothing down my navy dress, the same one I'd worn to the bank that day, feeling like it had become my armor. We walked through the courthouse doors, through the metal detectors, and up to the 3rd floor where family court hearings were held. In the hallway outside the courtroom, I saw Brandon with Attorney Barnes, both of them huddled in conversation, and my son looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, like he'd lost weight, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. When he noticed me, our eyes met for just a second before he looked away, unable or unwilling to hold my gaze. All rise for the Honorable Judge Catherine Morrison, the bailiff announced as we entered the courtroom. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s, with steel gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She looked over both parties with equal scrutiny before gesturing for us to sit. We're here regarding the petition filed by Brandon Patterson seeking guardianship and control of the financial affairs of Nicole Patterson, his mother, she stated, reading from the documents in front of her. Attorney Barnes stood up, smoothing his tie, and began his presentation with practiced ease. Your Honor, Mrs. Patterson is 74 years old, lives alone, and has demonstrated increasingly poor judgment in financial matters, he claimed, each word carefully chosen to paint me as helpless. She's vulnerable to exploitation, refuses reasonable help from family, and we believe she lacks the capacity to properly manage substantial assets. I sat there listening to him describe some fictional version of me, a confused old woman who couldn't remember her own address, who made reckless financial decisions, who needed her son to save her from herself. It took everything in me not to stand up and shout that every word was a calculated lie designed to steal my independence. Then it was Margaret's turn, and she stood with the calm confidence of someone holding all the winning cards. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that directly contradicts every claim made by the petitioner, she said, opening her briefcase. She handed the judge copies of my recent cognitive evaluation, my bank statements showing 43 years of consistent, intelligent financial management, and letters from 3 different financial advisors praising my investment decisions. Mrs. Patterson is not only competent, Your Honor, she's exceptionally sharp for any age, let alone 74, Maggie stated firmly. Furthermore, we have evidence that the petitioner, Mr. Brandon Patterson, has significant financial troubles and stands to benefit substantially from controlling his mother's assets. Judge Morrison studied the documents Margaret had presented, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp as she read through each page carefully. Attorney Barnes, did you conduct any independent evaluation of Mrs. Patterson's mental capacity before filing this petition? She asked, looking up from the papers. Barnes shifted uncomfortably in his expensive shoes. We relied on Mr. Patterson's first-hand observations of his mother's declining state, Your Honor, he responded, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. So that would be no. You did not obtain a professional evaluation? The judge pressed, and I saw Barnes's jaw tighten. That is correct, Your Honor, but... He started to explain, but Judge Morrison held up her hand to stop him. Mrs. Patterson, I'd like to hear from you directly, the judge said, turning her attention to me. My heart pounded as I stood up, Margaret giving my hand a quick, encouraging squeeze. Your Honor, I've lived in Portland for 43 years. raised 2 children, and managed my household finances since I was 30 years old, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. After my husband Daniel passed away 5 years ago, I continued managing everything just as I always had, paying bills on time, making investment decisions, maintaining my home. I saw Brandon staring at his hands, unable to look at me. My son came to my house with this attorney and pressured me to sign a power of attorney, claiming I was too old and vulnerable to handle my own affairs. I continued speaking, the words flowing more easily now. What he didn't tell me was that he owed $240,000 and saw my assets as his solution. When I discovered this and revoked the power of attorney, he filed this petition instead. Judge Morrison leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. "Mr. Patterson, is it true you have significant outstanding debts?" she asked Brandon directly. He stood up slowly, his face flushed. "Your Honor, my financial situation has nothing to do with my concern for my mother's welfare," he claimed, but even to my ears it sounded hollow. "Actually, Mr. Patterson, it has everything to do with your motivations for this petition," the judge replied coolly. Margaret then asked permission to call a witness, and Emma walked into the courtroom, her presence surprising everyone, especially Brandon. "Emma, what are you doing here?" Brandon asked, shocked. "Grandma asked me to testify, Dad," she said quietly, taking the witness stand. Under Margaret's gentle questioning, Emma described her regular visits with me, how I helped her budget her own finances, how I remembered every detail of her life and offered sound advice. "My grandmother is one of the sharpest people I know, Your Honor," Emma said firmly. "She helps me with my taxes every year, and her financial advice has helped me save for my first house down payment." Her words were simple but devastating to Brandon's case, a direct contradiction from his own daughter. The judge thanked Emma and then turned back to Brandon with an expression that would have frozen fire. "Mr. Patterson, based on the evidence presented today, I find no merit in your petition for guardianship," she stated clearly. "In fact, I find your actions troubling and potentially exploitative. Your mother has demonstrated clear competency, and your financial desperation provides obvious motive for this unnecessary legal action." Brandon's face went white as Judge Morrison continued. "This petition is denied, and I'm ordering you to cover all legal costs incurred by Mrs. Patterson in defending against it. Furthermore, I'm placing a note in the court record that any future attempts to question Mrs. Patterson's competency will be viewed with extreme skepticism." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. We left the courthouse into afternoon sunshine that had broken through the morning clouds, and I felt lighter than I had in months. Emma hugged me tight on the courthouse steps. "I'm so sorry about Dad, Grandma," she whispered, and I could hear tears in her voice. "It's not your fault, sweetheart. You did the right thing telling the truth," I assured her, holding her close. Margaret stood nearby, giving us space but smiling with the satisfaction of a battle well won. Brandon and Attorney Barnes emerged from the courthouse behind us, and Brandon started walking toward me, but Emma stepped between us protectively, and something about her stance made him stop in his tracks. "Mom, can we please talk?" Brandon called out, his voice desperate now. "There's nothing left to say, Brandon," I replied firmly, turning away from him. Emma linked her arm through mine, and Margaret flanked my other side as we walked to the parking lot. 3 generations and friendship united against greed. We went to Maria's coffee shop to celebrate, the same place where I'd watched Brandon's plans crumble at the bank weeks earlier. Maria brought us her special pastries and hugged me with tears in her eyes. "I knew you'd win, Nicole. I knew it," she said happily. Emma, Margaret, and I sat there for hours, talking, laughing, and slowly letting the tension of the past month drain away. But the story doesn't end there, because 2 days later, I received a handwritten letter from Brandon, not a legal document, but actual handwriting on notebook paper. "Dear Mom," it began, "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how sorry I am. I let my pride and my fear turn me into someone I don't recognize. You raised me better than this, and I betrayed everything you and Dad taught me about family and honor." I sat in my kitchen reading those words over and over, searching for sincerity between the lines. "I'm selling the Mercedes, cutting expenses, and Sarah and I are seeing a financial counselor. I'm going to fix my mess without dragging you into it. I understand if you never want to see me again, but I hope someday you might give me a chance to earn back your trust." The letter sat on my kitchen table for 3 days while I decided what to do with it. Part of me wanted to throw it away, to let Brandon face the consequences of his actions without my interference. But another part, the part that remembered rocking him to sleep as a baby and teaching him to ride a bike, wondered if people could really change. I called Emma and read her the letter over the phone. "What do you think, sweetheart?" I asked her. I think Dad needs to prove himself with actions, not just words, Grandma, she responded wisely. But I also think everyone deserves a chance at redemption if they're genuinely willing to work for it. Her maturity amazed me, and I realized Daniel and I had managed to raise at least one child who understood what really mattered. I decided to write back, not to forgive immediately, but to leave a door slightly open. Brandon, I wrote, trust is earned over time, not granted because of an apology letter. If you truly want to rebuild our relationship, prove it through consistent, honest actions over months and years, not days. Show your children how a real man takes responsibility for his mistakes. Until then, I need space to heal from what you tried to do to me. I mailed it the next day, and whatever happened next would be entirely up to him. For now, I had my independence, my dignity, and the certain knowledge that I'd fought for both and one life settled into a new rhythm over the following months. One where I felt more secure and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Emma started visiting every Sunday, bringing groceries and staying for lunch. Something that filled my house with laughter again. We'd cook together, her asking questions about family recipes that Josefina, Daniel's mother, had passed down to me decades ago. Grandma, did you ever think you'd have to go to court against your own son? Emma asked me one afternoon while we made tamales. Never in my worst nightmares, I admitted, showing her how to spread the masa just right. But sometimes life forces us to choose between being nice and being respected. Margaret stopped by regularly too, usually bringing wine and gossip from the legal community. You know you're somewhat famous now, right? She told me one evening. Famous? What are you talking about? I asked, confused. Your case is being discussed in legal circles as a perfect example of elder financial abuse prevention. Judge Morrison actually used it in a presentation at a conference, Maggie explained with pride. The idea that my painful experience might help other seniors protect themselves brought unexpected comfort. Maybe something good could come from Brandon's betrayal after all, if it taught others to be vigilant and stand up for themselves. The real surprise came 4 months after the court hearing, when I received a package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a simple wooden box, and when I opened it, I found a collection of items from Brandon's childhood. His first baseball card, the Father's Day card he'd made for Daniel in 3rd grade, and a photo of all of us at the beach in 1993. Tucked beneath these memories was another letter. Mom, I'm not asking for forgiveness yet because I haven't earned it, but I wanted you to have these because they remind me of who I'm supposed to be, who you and Dad raised me to be. I'm working 2 jobs now to pay off my debts, honestly. The letter continued. Sarah knows everything now, and we're in counseling together. Emma talks to me again, but only because I stopped making excuses and started taking real responsibility. I think about what I tried to do to you every single day, and it makes me sick. You deserved so much better from me. I cried reading those words. Not tears of sadness, but something more complicated, a mix of lingering hurt and cautious hope. I placed the box on my mantle next to Daniel's photo, a reminder that people are complex, that even those who hurt us might be struggling to find their way back to who they're meant to be. Whether Brandon would succeed remained to be seen, but at least he was trying, and maybe that was a start. Mrs. Chen noticed the box one day when she came over for tea. Is that from Brandon? She asked gently. Yes, I replied simply. Are you going to forgive him? She pressed. I thought about her question for a long moment. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip, Alice. It's a path you walk slowly, watching for proof that the person who hurt you has genuinely changed. I'm willing to walk that path, but I'm not running down it blindly, I explained. She nodded with understanding, squeezing my hand across the table. Daniel would be proud of how you handled all this, she said, and those words meant more to me than she could possibly know. That night, I sat in my living room looking at the box, at Daniel's photo, at the life I'd built, and nearly lost to my own son's greed. The house was quiet except for the ticking of Daniel's clock and the distant sound of traffic on Ainsworth Street. I thought about writing back to Brandon, maybe inviting him to coffee on neutral ground, but something held me back. He needed more time to prove himself, and honestly, so did I. Healing doesn't happen overnight, especially when the wound cuts as deep as family betrayal. For now, I was content with my life, my independence, and the knowledge that I'd stood my ground when it mattered most. 6 months after the court case, on a crisp October morning, I decided to do something I'd been putting off since Daniel died. I started going through his workshop in the garage, a space I'd barely touched in 5 years because it hurt too much. Emma offered to help, and we spent a Saturday afternoon sorting through tools, old projects, and memories. Grandma, what's this? Emma asked, holding up a wooden jewelry box Daniel had been making before he passed. Your grandfather was making that for me as a surprise, I said, running my fingers over the unfinished wood. He never got to complete it. Emma looked at the box thoughtfully. Maybe we could finish it together? I've been watching woodworking videos online. The idea of completing Daniel's final project with his great-granddaughter felt right, like closing a circle that needed closing. We spent the next several weekends in that garage, Emma learning to sand and stain while I told her stories about her grandfather. He would have loved teaching you this, I said, watching her carefully apply varnish with the concentration of a surgeon. Tell me about when you and Grandpa first met, she asked, and I found myself sharing stories I hadn't told anyone in years. We met at a church dance in 1972. He stepped on my feet twice before the song ended, but he had the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. Emma laughed, imagining her tall, strong grandfather as a clumsy young man. While we worked, Emma cautiously brought up her father. Dad asked if he could see you sometime, Grandma. He's been asking me for weeks, but I told him I wouldn't mention it unless you seemed ready, she said, not looking up from her sanding. I paused, considering her words carefully. What do you think, Emma? You see him more than I do. Has he really changed, or is this just another performance? I asked honestly. She set down her sandpaper and met my eyes with that direct gaze that reminded me so much of Daniel. I think he's genuinely trying, Grandma. He sold his Mercedes like he said. He's working at a construction site doing manual labor, and Mom says he comes home exhausted, but talks about rebuilding trust instead of making excuses. Her words carried weight, because Emma had never lied to me, not even to spare my feelings. He asks about you constantly, wants to know if you're okay, if you need anything fixed around the house, Emma continued. When I told him about us working on Grandpa's jewelry box, he cried. Like, actually cried, Grandma. That image shook me more than I expected. Brandon crying over a woodworking project connecting his daughter to her grandfather. Tell him he can come by next Saturday afternoon. Just him, no lawyers, no agendas. We'll have coffee and talk, nothing more, I said finally. Emma's face lit up with hope, but I held up my hand. But Emma, listen to me carefully. One conversation doesn't erase what he did. This is just a first step on a very long road. She nodded, understanding the gravity of what I was offering. The following Saturday, I was more nervous than I'd been for the court hearing, straightening pillows that didn't need straightening and brewing coffee 3 times because I kept forgetting if I'd already done it. At exactly 2 o'clock, Brandon's truck, an old Ford pickup covered in construction dust, pulled into my driveway where his Mercedes used to park. He got out slowly, wearing jeans and a work shirt, his hands showing calluses and dirt under the fingernails. This wasn't the polished businessman who'd tried to steal my independence. This was someone who looked like he'd been humbled by hard work and harder lessons. He stood at my door for a full minute before knocking, and when I opened it, we just looked at each other in silence. Hi, Mom, Brandon said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. Hello, Brandon. Come in, I replied, stepping aside to let him enter. He walked into my living room like he was visiting for the first time, taking in every detail as if seeing it with new eyes. I noticed him pause at the mantel, looking at the wooden box he'd sent me months ago, now displayed prominently next to his father's photo. You kept it, he said, surprised. Of course I kept it. Those memories of who you were remind me of who you might become again, I told him honestly. We sat down, me in my armchair and him on the couch with the coffee table between us like a demilitarized zone. I poured coffee and we sat in awkward silence for a moment before Brandon spoke. Mom, I've practiced what I wanted to say 1,000 times, but now that I'm here, none of those words seem good enough, he began, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee cup. I destroyed your trust, tried to steal your independence, and dragged you to court. I became the exact kind of person Dad always warned me not to be. His voice cracked on the word Dad, and I saw genuine pain in his eyes. The worst part is, I convinced myself I was helping you, that I had a right to your money because I was desperate. I was so deep in my own problems that I stopped seeing you as my mother and started seeing you as my solution. Why didn't you just ask me for help, Brandon? I asked, the question that had haunted me for months. He laughed bitterly. Pride, shame, fear that you'd say no or worse, that you'd say yes and I'd have to admit I'd failed. He set down his coffee cup and looked directly at me for the first time. Dad always made everything look so easy, you know? He worked hard, provided for us, never complained. I thought I had to be like that. Never show weakness, never admit when I was drowning. Tears rolled down his face and he didn't bother wiping them away. Instead, I became someone who tried to steal from his own mother. How did I fall that far? I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, but I'd learned that real love sometimes means letting people sit with the consequences of their choices. You fell because you stopped asking for help honestly and started looking for shortcuts, I said firmly. Your father worked hard, yes, but he also asked for help when he needed it. He borrowed money from his brother to start his business, and he paid it back with interest and gratitude. There's no shame in needing help, Brandon. The shame is in lying and manipulating to get it. He nodded, absorbing my words like someone dying of thirst. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry, Mom. Not sorry I got caught, but genuinely sorry for what I tried to do to you. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, longer than we'd talked in years. Brandon told me about the counseling he and Sarah were doing, about the financial advisor helping them rebuild properly, about the construction job that paid less but taught him humility. The guys I work with now, they're good people, Mom. They work hard for every dollar, and they don't pretend to be something they're not, he explained. One of them is 62 years old and still climbing scaffolding because he loves the work. He reminds me of Dad. I told him about my life, about finishing Daniel's jewelry box with Emma, about Margaret's visits, and Maria's friendship. We were talking like actual people again, not like adversaries in a courtroom or players in a con game. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room, Brandon asked a question I'd been expecting. Is there any way I can earn back your trust, Mom? Not today, not next week, but eventually? He asked with vulnerability I hadn't heard in his voice since he was a child. I thought carefully before answering, wanting to be honest but fair. Trust is rebuilt the same way it's built in the first place, Brandon. Through consistent, honest actions over time. Show up when you say you will. Tell the truth even when it's uncomfortable. Help without expecting anything in return. Do that for a year, maybe 2, and we'll see, I explained, watching him process my words. A year or 2, he repeated, nodding slowly. That's fair. That's more than fair, actually. He stood up, preparing to leave, but paused at the door. Can I come back next Saturday? Maybe help with some yard work or fix that loose step on your porch? He asked hesitantly. I noticed he wasn't asking for money, forgiveness, or special treatment, just permission to show up and be useful. The porch step has been loose for 6 months. If you want to fix it, bring your own tools, I replied, a small test of his sincerity. I will, Mom. I promise, he said, and something about the way he said it made me believe him, at least enough to give him this chance. After Brandon left, I called Emma to tell her how it went. So, what do you think, Grandma? She asked eagerly. I think your father has a long way to go, but for the first time, I believe he might actually walk that path, I admitted. Time will tell if he follows through or if this is just another show. Emma was silent for a moment before responding. I'm proud of you, Grandma. Not just for protecting yourself in court, but for being willing to leave room for redemption. That takes real strength. Her words touched something deep inside me, and I realized that throughout this entire ordeal, I'd gained something unexpected. A deeper relationship with my granddaughter, and a clearer understanding of my own strength. The following Saturday, Brandon arrived at 9 in the morning with a toolbox that had clearly seen recent use, not some pristine set he'd just bought to impress me. He spent 4 hours fixing my porch step, replacing some rotted boards I didn't even know were damaged, and repainting the railing. I watched him work from my kitchen window, seeing echoes of Daniel in the way he measured twice before cutting, the way he took pride in doing the job right instead of just doing it fast. When he finished, he came to the door covered in sawdust and paint. All done, Mom. Should last another 20 years now, he reported with tired satisfaction. Thank you, Brandon. That looks really good, I said, inspecting his work. Would you like some lunch before you go? The invitation surprised both of us, a small gesture that acknowledged his effort. I'd like that, he replied with a genuine smile I hadn't seen in years. We ate sandwiches at my kitchen table, and he told me funny stories about his construction crew, about the mistakes he'd made learning to properly frame a wall, about the Mexican laborers who taught him Spanish curse words. We laughed together, really laughed, and for a moment it felt like the years of tension and betrayal had never happened. But they had happened, and we both knew rebuilding would take much more than one fixed porch and one shared meal. Over the next several months, Brandon showed up every Saturday without fail, rain or shine, finding projects around my house that needed attention. He fixed my leaking kitchen faucet, cleaned out my gutters, repaired the fence gate that stuck, all without being asked and without expecting praise. Emma often joined him, and watching them work together reminded me of when Brandon used to help Daniel with projects before ambition and debt poisoned his judgment. Dad's different now, isn't he, Grandma? Emma said one day while we made lemonade for the workers. Different or just trying to appear different? That's what I'm still figuring out. I replied honestly, refusing to let hope override caution. But actions speak louder than words, and Brandon's actions were consistent. He brought Sarah and the kids to visit, not asking for anything, just wanting me to spend time with my grandchildren. Sarah pulled me aside during one visit. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to apologize too. I knew Brandon was struggling financially, but I had no idea he'd tried to take control of your money until after the court case," she confessed, tears in her eyes. "When I found out, I was furious. I told him if he ever pulled something like that again, I'd leave. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you." Her apology felt genuine, and I appreciated her honesty about her own guilt in not questioning Brandon's behavior sooner. The real test came 9 months after our first coffee meeting, when my hot water heater died on a Sunday night, flooding my basement. I called a plumber who said he couldn't come until Wednesday and would charge $900 for the emergency repair. Before I could even think about calling Brandon, my phone rang. "Mom, Emma told me about your water heater. I can be there in 30 minutes with tools and a new heater," Brandon said without preamble. "Brandon, it's 8 o'clock at night and you've worked all week," I protested. "Mom, please let me help, not because I owe you, but because you need help and I can provide it," he replied, and something about his tone made me say yes. He arrived with 2 of his coworkers, both of whom refused payment, and worked until midnight installing a new water heater Brandon had somehow acquired at cost through his construction connections. "This would have cost you $1,500 with a plumber, Mom. This cost me $400 for the parts, and these guys donated their time because I told them you're important to me," Brandon explained as they cleaned up. I insisted on paying him back for the parts, and he initially refused until I got firm. "Brandon, I appreciate the help, but I'm not a charity case. Let me pay for the parts at least," I said sternly. "Yes, ma'am," he agreed, accepting a check for $400 with grace instead of resentment. That night, after everyone left and my basement was dry with hot water flowing again, I sat in my living room realizing something important had shifted. Brandon had helped me not to prove a point or earn forgiveness, but simply because I needed help and he was capable of providing it. That's what family is supposed to do, show up when needed without keeping score or expecting medals. Maybe, just maybe, my son was finding his way back to the values Daniel and I had tried to instill in him decades ago. The path to redemption was long, and we weren't at the end of it yet, but for the first time, I could see us actually getting there. A full year after Brandon's first visit following the court case, Emma suggested we all have Thanksgiving dinner together at my house. "Grandma, I know it might be too soon, but I really want us to be a family again," she pleaded with those eyes that could always convince me of anything. I hesitated, remembering the last family gathering before everything fell apart, but I also recognized that healing requires risk. Okay, but everyone contributes. This isn't me cooking for ungrateful children. This is a family effort. I agreed with conditions. Emma's face lit up, and she immediately started coordinating who would bring what, taking charge with organizational skills that reminded me of myself at her age. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear, and by noon, my house filled with the smell of roasting turkey and the sound of family chaos. Brandon and Sarah arrived early to help cook, their kids running around playing with toys while adults worked in the kitchen. "Mom, where do you want me to put this sweet potato casserole?" Brandon asked, navigating my kitchen like he used to do as a teenager. "Same place it's always gone, Brandon. Nothing's changed that much," I replied, and we both smiled at the normalcy of the moment. Margaret showed up with wine and stories from her latest case, fitting into our family dynamic as naturally as blood relatives. As we sat down to eat, everyone around my dining room table, I felt Daniel's absence acutely, but also felt his presence in the laughter of his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. "Before we eat, I'd like to say something," Brandon announced, standing up with his wine glass. Everyone quieted, and I braced myself, never quite sure what to expect even after a year of consistent behavior. "Mom, this year has taught me what really matters. Not money, not status, not pride, but family, honesty, and second chances I didn't deserve but received anyway," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for not giving up on me completely, even when I gave you every reason to. Dad would probably be disappointed in what I did, but I hope he'd be proud of how I'm trying to make it right." Tears filled my eyes, and I wasn't the only one. Sarah squeezed Brandon's hand. Emma wiped her face with her napkin, and even Margaret, who'd seen me through the worst of the legal battle, looked moved. "Your father would tell you that redemption isn't a destination, Brandon. It's a daily choice to be better than you were yesterday," I said, raising my own glass. "You've been making that choice consistently for a year now, and that means something." We clinked glasses, and in that moment, surrounded by family who'd been broken and were slowly healing, I felt something I hadn't felt since Daniel died. Complete. Not because everything was perfect, but because we'd survived something terrible and chosen to rebuild rather than walk away. After dinner, while the women cleaned up and the men watched football with the kids, Emma pulled me aside. "Grandma, there's something I need to tell you. I've been accepted to grad school, but it's expensive, and I'm not sure how I'll afford it," she confessed nervously. Before I could respond, Brandon appeared in the doorway. "Emma, I've been saving for this. I want to pay for your first semester, and I've set up a fund to help with the rest," he said quietly. Emma looked shocked. "Dad, you don't have to do that. I know you're still paying off debts." Brandon shook his head. "This is important, and Grandma taught me that family helps family honestly, not through manipulation or control, but through genuine support." That Thanksgiving marked a turning point, not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because we'd proven that broken things can be repaired if everyone is willing to do the work. Brandon continued showing up every Saturday, but now it was less about proving himself and more about genuinely enjoying our time together. We'd work on projects, share meals, talk about everything from politics to family history, rebuilding our relationship piece by piece like a complex puzzle. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Brandon said one Saturday while we planted spring flowers in my garden. "Of course," I replied, patting soil around a rose bush. "Do you forgive me?" he asked simply, and I could tell the question had been weighing on him for months. I sat back on my heels, considering my answer carefully. "Forgiveness isn't a light switch, Brandon. It's more like a sunrise, gradual and earned through time," I began, choosing my words with care. "Have you proven you're genuinely sorry and committed to change?" "Yes." "Do I trust you more than I did a year ago?" "Absolutely." "Am I completely over what you tried to do?" "No, and I might never be," I admitted honestly. "But I'm choosing to focus on who you're becoming rather than who you were during your worst moment." "If that's forgiveness, then yes, I forgive you." Brandon hugged me tight, dirt-covered gloves and all, and I felt him shaking with silent tears against my shoulder. The real miracle came 2 years after the court case, when Brandon was promoted to project manager at his construction company, earning enough to finally pay off his debts completely. He came to tell me the news in person, his face showing pride mixed with humility. "I did it, Mom. Every last dollar paid back, and I did it honestly through hard work," he said, showing me the final payment confirmation. "I'm proud of you, son. Your father would be proud too," I told him, and I meant every word. "The best part is, I feel good about this money. It doesn't carry the weight of shame and desperation like before. I earned it, and I value it differently now," he explained, and I recognized the wisdom that only comes from surviving your own mistakes. At 76 years old now, I've learned that life rarely follows the paths we plan. My son betrayed me, tried to steal my independence, and dragged me through court, causing pain I never imagined feeling from my own child. But through that darkness, I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, deepened relationships with people who truly cared about me, and eventually witnessed genuine redemption in someone I'd almost given up on. The scars remain, subtle but permanent, reminders of how quickly trust can shatter and how slowly it rebuilds. Yet those scars also testify to survival, resilience, and the possibility that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work. Today, as I sit in my living room with Daniel's completed jewelry box on the mantle, filled with letters from Brandon documenting his journey back to integrity, I understand something important. Protecting myself wasn't selfish, it was necessary. Standing up to family wasn't cruel, it was loving myself enough to demand respect. And leaving room for redemption wasn't weakness, it was strength tempered with wisdom. If you followed this entire story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to make the difficult choice between protecting yourself and helping family? Have you watched someone you love lose their way and then fight to find it again? Share your experiences in the comments because these stories matter, and we learn from each other's struggles and triumphs. Before I close this chapter of my life, I want to leave you with the lessons I learned through this painful journey. First, never let anyone, not even family, make you feel incompetent or unworthy of respect because of your age. Your years represent wisdom, experience, and strength earned through decades of living. Second, trust must be protected carefully, given thoughtfully, and when broken, rebuilt slowly with proof of genuine change, not just promises and apologies. Third, asking for help honestly is honorable. Manipulating and lying to get what you want is cowardice dressed up as necessity. And finally, redemption is possible for those willing to humble themselves, work consistently, and prove through actions that they've learned from their mistakes. My son Brandon tried to steal my independence during my most vulnerable time, but I fought back with documentation, legal support, and the courage to stand alone if necessary. The court vindicated me, protecting not just my assets, but my dignity and autonomy. Was the battle worth the pain? Yes, because it taught both of us invaluable lessons about integrity, respect, and the true meaning of family. Brandon learned that shortcuts built on betrayal lead nowhere good, and I learned that loving someone sometimes means refusing to be their victim, even if it breaks your heart. We've rebuilt something real from the ashes of what he destroyed, not the naive trust of before, but a mature relationship based on proven character and mutual respect. If this story resonated with you, if you've experienced something similar, or fear you might someday face this situation, I encourage you to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done in my situation, whether you think I was too harsh or too lenient, and what lessons you're taking from my experience. Hit that subscribe button because every week on this channel, we share real stories about real people facing extraordinary challenges with courage and dignity. Remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself, never too weak to fight for what's right, and never too broken to rebuild something better. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking this journey with me, and for being part of a community that values honesty, strength, and the possibility of second chances earned through genuine transformation.